So if you're anywhere near my age, I don't know how long they did this, but I grew up in school watching films in science class narrated oftentimes by a man named Carl Sagan, pretty well-known atheist, had books and television show and so forth. He said in one of his books, the cosmos is all that is or ever was or ever will be. He went on to say in that same quote, our feeblest contemplations of the cosmos stir us. You know, you can't help but just look up into the heavens and we're stirred, right? There's a tingling in the spine, a catch in the voice, a faint sensation as if a distant memory of falling from height. We know we are approaching the greatest of mysteries. An atheist looking up saying that the cosmos just makes your spine tingle. There's so many mysteries. Of course, the only problem was in his realm that those mysteries did not include the existence of a God, or the God that we know. More recently, Richard Dawkins declared in his book, The God Delusion, the factual premise of religion. The God hypothesis is untenable. God most certainly does not exist. A lot of people genuinely believe that. Now, if you're here today, there's a good chance you probably genuinely believe the opposite. That there is a God, that you believe in God. You're here expressing your faith in God, and you're confident that He exists. But how do you respond if someone comes up to you, a friend, relative, coworker, whatever, neighbor, and asks you, well, how do you know? How do you know He exists? I mean, really, that's an honest question. I mean, that's a good question. What makes you so sure about God being so real? Now, when I was a kid, it was long enough ago that you could just simply say, well, because it says so in the Bible. Oh, okay, and people would kind of take that, whether they really believed it or not, they at least would accept that as an answer. And you'd go to Genesis 1 and say, well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's the fourth word in the Bible. Obviously, there's a God. He shows up pretty quickly in his book. We know there's a God. Now, that worked for me in fourth grade. That satisfied my longing and my questioning. But if the person you're talking to doesn't believe in the Bible as an authoritative document written by inspired by a higher being, God, they don't care that His name isn't the fourth letter or word in the book, or the fifth word in the book, or the 100th word. They don't care at all. Any of the words in the Bible that you would quote to them would be very much like in the movie Elf, the sign in front of the coffee shop that says, world's best coffee. The only person who really believed that was like Elf. Everybody else in the coffee shop's like, yeah, not really. Just because it says it on the sign doesn't make it true, and there'll be people who just because it says it in here, my experience tells you something different. It would be their response to that. So we're going to have to come up with a better answer for our faith than, well, the Bible says there's a God. Because a lot of people don't believe in the Bible. Or because, well, I've always believed it. That's what my mom told me. Of course there's a God. Is that good enough? Moms tell kids a lot of things that, later on they find out differently about. So more and more people are starting to ask serious questions. And they might come to you in maybe an angry tone, but I think it's because they're genuinely asking, well, how do you know? How do you know? Why should anybody else believe in this God you say exists? How's your truth better than my truth? Those are legitimate, honest, genuine questions. Now, several of the top-selling books in recent years have been written by a group of people known as new atheists, right? They're the thinkers out there, and I don't know, they call themselves new. I think they're pretty much saying some of the stuff that's been around for a long time. But people like Richard Dawkins, who I just quoted, probably one of the most aggressive atheists today. He wrote the book, The God Delusion. Sam Harris wrote the book, The End of Faith. Christopher Hitchens wrote a best-selling book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Isn't it kind of humbling to think you work with people who honestly think your faith in God poisons the world they live in? But they honestly believe that. And these authors and a lot of more people out there who are modern skeptics have been very active writing books and spreading their ideas on social media, through their blogs, in magazines, in interviews, television, live events, everywhere. And as a result, there's a greater and greater demand being put on Christians to have an account for our belief. Really, why do you believe? Really, what makes you say God is real? It's not good enough that you learned it from your parents. It can't be just a hand-me-down thing from your parents. There has to be more than just some leap of faith. Why? Why have you altered your life around this message? More than ever before in our nation, we must be, as the Apostle Peter instructs in 1 Peter 3, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. We must have answers. We must have an answer for people. Not an argument. We don't need to fight them, but just an answer. A legitimate, genuine question deserves a legitimate, genuine answer. So we're going to look at several compelling reasons today that can give us some confidence that God exists, and it's going to be based in science. It's going to be based in philosophy and in personal experience. You put those three things combined that we're going to talk about, and it's a pretty good argument that God is real beyond Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God. There's more that points to it. The first reason, oh, and by the way, let me just, some of the stuff's going to be a little weighty, right? A little weightier than I generally, I'm not all that weighty. Just my brain doesn't function that way. You might have to lean into this one a little bit today. I mean, you know, you're going to be tempted to think about chocolate chip cookies and ice storms and whatever, and to really focus on this one. Really kind of key in on what's being said, because this is stuff that you'll want to have in your back pocket for a long time to come. The first reason that we'll look at that really points us to God is that the beginning of the universe points us to God as its originator. This is called cosmology. Right? It's the study of origin and structure and development of the physical universe. This reason is commonly referred to as the cosmological argument. And rather than me trying to explain it in great detail, I have about a 4-minute video I want you to watch, and we'll kind of recap it a little bit. But listen to what some good Christian thinkers, Dr. William Lane Craig and his ministry, put this together.
Is, or ever was, or ever will be. One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the redshift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
All right, I'll try to post that on our Facebook page if you want to access that later. There's a lot of information in there, and if you're not used to hanging out in the scientific world with scientific terms, you might have missed half of that. If you're like me, I've watched it about 4 times, and every time I catch a little more, I go, oh yeah, that's what he's talking about. So let's recap it just a hair. Let's highlight some of the main points here. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, is this whole cosmology. Yeah, that theory, that word. Things don't just pop into existence unless there are weeds in your backyard. But then that has a cause too. I mean, there's a seed there somewhere, right? I mean, things don't just happen. It doesn't. It hasn't from the beginning, and it doesn't. It just doesn't happen that way. Science itself operates on the principle that every event requires a cause, something that made it happen. Now, an objection, and a legitimate one, will be, well, wait a minute. If everything needs a cause, then what caused God? I mean, that'd be a genuine question, and that's a good one. But it misunderstands the argument itself. It doesn't say everything needs a cause. It says everything that has a beginning needs a cause. What if you don't have a beginning? What if you're an eternal God, Alpha and Omega, who always has been and always will be? He doesn't need a cause. He is the cause. He's the one who has always been. He simply exists. He stands outside of creation. Secondly, the universe began to exist, all right? Everything begins to exist, has a cause. Well, the universe began at some point. It began to exist. Pretty much the entire scientific community acknowledges this fact, that at some point, the universe wasn't. You know, it had a start at some point. It started with something at some time and came into existence. Most scientists would probably say that is the Big Bang. That's what, we read in school. That's probably what your children are learning in school, the Big Bang theory. Stephen Hawking, the popular author and physicist and also an atheist, summed it up like this. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, as a Christian, I don't have a problem with a Big Bang. The question is, what caused the Big Bang? If the Big Bang happened, what made it happen? What banged it, right? What made it what made it go? Everything has a cause. The universe began. Well, what caused it? That goes into number 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. It began to exist. Everything that begins has a cause. The universe began. So the universe has to have a cause just by logic, just by science. The Big Bang theory itself calls for an outside physical universe, something powerful enough to make it happen. The little video showed the universe in a box. Who opened that box? Who was powerful enough to make that thing happen and the bang happen? From a Christian point of view, we would say that the something is actually a someone. That the Big Bang sounds an awful lot like the biblical account in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he said things like, let there be, and bang, there was. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, you can argue the finer details of it. I wasn't there. I can't tell you. But I don't have a problem with what scientists say about a Big Bang. And that's why we learned in the video, if you were listening carefully, if you caught this, that even Einstein and some other thinkers literally resisted this idea of a beginning point because they didn't like the theological implications that came with it. It gives too much support for some supernatural creation event. The Big Bang itself does. So if you follow the facts to where they lead you, it seems to lead you right into an intelligent designer of some sort. Now, that's where maybe an argument could occur, but we would like to call him God. Reason number two that we can point to a God. The fine-tuning in the universe points us to God as an intelligent fine-tuner. I think the video mentioned this a little bit. Roger kind of talked about this a little bit when he was up here speaking. Look at nature. Don't you love nature? Don't you love driving through the mountains? Don't you love a sunset? Even just sitting down, turning on the Discovery Channel, and just see the wonders of the world is filled with beauty and complexity and wonder. How can you not agree with King David, who said, the heavens declare the glory of God and the sky above proclaims his handiwork? Yes, it does. We would acknowledge that. But that verse isn't going to convince someone who's not a believer. Well, the evidence shows that this incredible array of life and beauty and complexity did not spring into existence by itself. Science is telling us that the building blocks of our world, these laws, the physical constants that govern all the matter in the universe, appear to be precisely balanced and finely tuned so that life can flourish and even exist in the first place. And all these laws came together all at once during the Big Bang. Right? So in other words, the universe exploded into being. There were a number of variables and the very structure of the universe that had to be set exactly the right way, precisely how they are in order for life to exist. And Roger talked a little bit about that. He mentioned some of them. He found a list of 35. My notes tell me there's some 50 of these constants that occur. So he and I are going to have arm wrestles later and see if we can name them all. But all of those had to be just perfectly right in order for life to even exist. I'm not talking about just be comfortable, for life to even exist. For example, the force of gravity, if it were to change, and I'm not scientifically, wired necessarily, so I'm reading this off of someone's research. If it were to change, gravity were to change by 1 part in 10,000 billion, that life would be impossible. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds impressive to me, right? That you can't change gravity a whole lot, or life will change. If the explosion of the Big Bang had differed in strength by as little as 1 part in 1,060, life as we know it would not be possible. That list goes on and on and on through whole 50-some constants that scientists have discovered. When Lee Strobel was writing his book, The Case for the Creator, he interviewed an expert in these matters, Dr. Robin Collins. And during the interview, Dr. Collins referred to another physical constant, the cosmological constant, which is an energy density of empty space known as dark energy. Right? Again, this is kind of a different world for me. Collins said that the setting of this one is inconceivably precise. He said, let's say you were way out in space, we're going to throw a dart at random toward Earth. It would be like successfully hitting a bullseye that is 1/1,000,000,000 of a trillionth of an inch in diameter, less than the size of a solitary atom. The thought of you just randomly throwing a dart and hitting that target is how precise it has to be for life to happen. He said if the odds are that small for just one area to be so precisely tuned to support life, imagine how small the odds become when you add all the other factors, the 50 or so factors, in together. And the chances would be so small that Lee Strobel says that by comparison, they make the lottery look like a sure bet. You throw a buck in, you're going to win. You got it made. Well, that's not the case, right? Now the interesting thing is that these facts, these ideas have not only influenced Christians, because we look at that and go, yeah, see, there's got to be something, it's got to be a God, but atheists have taken note as well. An atheist cosmologist, Fred Hoyle, said that it looks like a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. It's something we can't explain. There's something outside of physics that has toyed with this universe that we're in. Anthony Flew, one of the most prominent atheists in the 20th century, he actually rejected his atheism at age 81 because of this kind of evidence. When he shocked the world, when he announced, he said, "I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence." Dr. Paul Davies, one of the leading physicists and I always want to say cosmologists of our day, put it this way. I'm more in that world, see? Not really. It says, "I cannot believe that our existence in this universe is a mere quirk of fate. We are truly meant to be here." Now, that's quite a statement from someone who doesn't believe in God, who's like, an atheist, right? It's pretty crazy. And so the argument stands that the convergence of many examples of fine-tuning in the universe, each independently set to the precise measurements necessary to support life, points to the existence of an astonishing, intelligent designer. It couldn't have been an accident. It couldn't have just flopped out there and made itself. There's just too many variables. It couldn't have happened. God put it this way in the book of Isaiah, speaking about himself, "To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out the their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable." Reason number 3 for the proof of the existence of God. Our sense of morality points us to God as our moral lawgiver. Think about this for a moment. Everybody has this internal moral compass, so to speak. We have this standard of morality that we have, and it's above us, and it comes from outside of us. Something has put this in us. Now, some would say that the source of morality is maybe cultural in nature, and some of that, no doubt, has a factor in us. But here's the thing. Why would we invent a moral code that we can never fulfill? Why would we personally, if I'm going to invent a moral code, I make it easy that I'm just always going to do, rather than something that I struggle to live up to and that I feel like a failure sometimes, that we condemn ourselves. Here's the line I'm going for and I can't seem to reach it. We'd make it a little easier on ourselves, just by nature. But the thing is, we didn't invent it, and we can't get rid of it. It's part of what it means to be human. The Bible describes it as our conscience. It's just this inbred, so to speak, part of us. C.S. Lewis comments on this in the opening section of his book, Mere Christianity, when he says, "Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right or wrong, you will find the same man going back on his a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he'll be complaining it's not fair. Have they not let the cat out of the bag and shown that whatever they say, they really know the law of nature just like anybody else?" So they can break a promise to us, but if we do something against them, like, wait a minute, you can't do that. Well, says who? It's just inside nature that tells them you can't do that. He says, "It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong, but they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication table." So again, some would say that, our moral code is instilled upon us in society, and that, like I said, that might be partially true, but morality goes beyond your local culture. It goes beyond that. Why would we intuitively know that when we see videos of things ISIS has done over the past couple, 3 years, that it's not right. How would the whole world look at that and say, you're burning people alive, you're raping and torturing innocent children? I mean, we all look at that and say, there's something not right about that. I mean, there's not a lot of question. How would, in World War II, so many nations come together and say, what you're doing is wrong to the Jewish people? I mean, and so nations rose to fight and risk their own lives against that. Why? Where did that come from? Well, because if murdering someone in your own home is wrong, then murdering someone across the street is wrong, and then murdering someone across town or across the globe is still wrong. It's this inborn understanding that we have. There's something that tells us it's just wrong anywhere. It's the conscience that we have. But where did we get it? I mean, we didn't invent it, It transcends politics and culture. It's something we can't get away from. So where did it come from? Could it be a moral lawgiver that actually knit those into the moral standards, into the hearts of our souls and the fabric of what it means to be a human being? Something did that. It certainly squares with the logic and experience, and it also happens to fall in line with what the Scripture tells us in Romans chapter 2:15. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. The law, God's words written on our hearts, while their conscience also bears witness. Their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. Talking about people who don't know. It's still written on their hearts. The moral argument is summed up pretty well by Lee Strobel in his book, The Case for Faith. He says, without God, morality is simply the product of socio-biological evolution, basically a question of taste or personal preference. Without God, there's no absolute right and wrong that imposes itself on our conscience. But we know deep down that objective moral values do exist. Some actions, like rape, child torture, for example, are universal moral abominations, and therefore this means God exists. Well, a lot could be said. I'm just hitting the tip of the iceberg on stuff today, trying to rapidly go through this just for time's sake. But the evidence from our three arguments stand pretty strong. They point very strongly to the existence of a God who started this universe with some type of big bang or whatever it was, word, we know from his words in Genesis, who fine-tuned the universe into an extremely precise measurements that just so happen to support life as we know it, and that created us as humans with an inescapable sense of morality. Now, you might think, well, those arguments sound good. I mean, how effective are they? I mean, really, what does it matter that I know this stuff? Lee Strobel and Mark Middleburg, they're two of the apologists who actually put this series together. This isn't my stuff, right? They designed this Room for Doubt series, and churches around are doing this. They hosted a debate between Dr. William Lane Craig, the man who did his ministry did the video we watched, and a prominent atheist named Frank Zindler. They held the debate at Willow Creek, a church in Chicago area with nearly 8,000 people in the attendance of the debate. And the debate was on the question of whether or not God exists. So you got an atheist and apologist for the faith having this debate. Dr. Craig used the arguments that we just talked about today, and at the end of the event, they took a vote. When the numbers were tabulated, 97% of the attendees said that the case for God was stronger than the case for there not being a God. Now it's at a church, so you might think, well, duh. I mean, all the Christians are going, yeah, you'd expect those kind of numbers. But hundreds of the people who voted indicated they were not Christians. So it wasn't like a pure Christian audience. As a matter of fact, 82% of the non-Christians said that the case for God was stronger than the case for there not being a God. And by the end of the night, 47 of those people decided to go ahead and commit themselves to Christ because of these arguments that we're given. Dr. Craig has used these arguments in debates with skeptics all over the world, and he just keeps winning in these debates because when the scientists get together and argue this stuff, it just makes sense. I probably couldn't debate and win, but he's smarter than I, so he can come up with some of the peripheral things. But you can be confident. The point is that God really exists. I mean, there's outside evidence that says God exists. But let's look at one more. And this flows out of your personal experience. And nobody can argue this. Nobody can argue this. Number 4, our personal experience points to a God who's worthy of worship. All right. Now, some of the stuff looked at is kind of heady. You might have to hear it again to kind of let it soak in, or watch that video again, like I said, let it soak in. But there's one personal response here that those of us who are followers of Jesus can give when people ask, how do you know God is real? You can look them in the eye and say, because he's changed me. And nobody can argue that. Nobody can argue that. They can't argue a changed life. Genuine experience is difficult to dismiss. And that's why the Apostle Paul used it so often. In the book of Acts, in chapter 26, Paul's talking before government leaders and all these unbelieving people, and he talks about his experience meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus and how he was persecuting Christians and how Jesus appeared to him. And in this context, when he's telling the story of his changed life, King Agrippa was hearing Paul's story, and he asked Paul, he said, do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? It's like, are you serious, Paul? That was in verse 28 of Acts 26. And Paul responds in verse 29, well, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I. He says, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. I do expect you to believe God because of my story. Why? Because you can't argue what he's done in my life. You can't argue that. In John chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man, and he's being pressured by people to deny Jesus, and he didn't know much about theology, and he couldn't tell you a whole lot about science, and he couldn't probably tell you philosophy, but he did know one thing. In John 9:25, he says, one thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. I can't tell you physics. I can't get into the medical explanation of what happened. All I know is I couldn't see, and now I can. You can't fight that. You can't argue that. Nobody can argue that. So if you're a Christ follower, talking about God's activity in your life, how he interacts with you, how he leads you, how he has changed you, that can be an important part of your answer to people as to how you know God exists. I just know he does. I know he does. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that he just simply does. Why? Because he's interacted with me so much. He's a real part of my life. We just happen to have so much more than our experience, though. We do have science on our side. We do have philosophy on our side. And in the weeks ahead, we have history on our side. There's so many things on our side when we have this conversation with people. And we'll talk about this in the future, of how all these things point to this invisible God who is. The God who creates, the God who loves, the God who is worthy of our worship. If you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, you can stand on those truths. You can be confident. And I hope that this series, if nothing else, will make you more confident in your faith. If you're on the outskirts, kind of looking in, wondering, I hope that this gives you some thoughts, right? Don't take my word for it. Go prove him wrong. I dare you. Go prove God wrong. See what you find. Do all the research you want. Get into science, get into philosophy, look at history. You will find at the end God. That's just how it is. Let's pray together.